Hey everybody, it's your host Marlon Gardenera. You're tuned in to the Divided States of America show. As usual, I appreciate you tuning in. Today, internet privacy. I think I used to take it for granted. I even offered bad advice on how to deal with it. We'll talk about that, briefly cover today's news. It'll be a quick one, but as usual, grateful you're here. You're watching the Divided States of America show.
Welcome to the Divided States of America show, where your host, Marlon Gardenera, takes on the most divisive issues in our divided nation. We'll sort through the best and worst of politics and culture, asking questions and looking for answers that our two-ring, two-party circus has failed to provide. And here is your host, Marlon Gardenera.
Hey folks, as usual, I'm grateful you're here. We are here weekdays, noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, YouTube Live, Facebook Live, and Twitter. You can always catch older episodes of the program on any of those three venues. We'll get the podcast up soon. As usual, I am open and honest. We're testing some things out. We're working on the format, working on the best ways to deliver what we think is important. The goal, take on the most divisive issues in our divided nation. The objective is clear. We're not going to solve the problems of the world, but we're certainly going to pick the topics that we know are an issue, and we know people are talking about them, and we're going to look for that middle ground. I think a good portion of our country is in the middle, and I say it over and over. They go to work, they take care of their families, they want to have a good life. Many of them do their best to avoid politics, but every once in a while, it just creeps into their space, and it makes life more interesting, more challenging, and even more difficult. So we want to be able to talk about those things. We want to be able to make progress on those things. And I think the best path is thoughtful, respectful conversations about just that. As the show grows, we'll start bringing in more interviewees and more of you to share your opinions. In the early stages, we're still working on the production, the directing, the technical aspects of it, finding my voice and understanding what messages resonate best with you. The best thing you can do to help that process is communicate with me, and I receive wonderful feedback, some critical, some appreciative. I like it all. It helps format or lay out the path, the roadmap for the format we want to use moving forward. You can reach me at host@thedsashow.com, host@thedsashow.com, and you can certainly leave your comments, questions, concerns in any one of those venues. They all have the ability for you to chat and or comment. When you go to YouTube and make your comments, I can see them here on my screen and can post them and discuss them if you have any that you want to put out there. Before we get to today's main topic, internet privacy, which I said I've taken for granted, and I offered really bad advice. I'll tell you that bad advice in a minute. But before we get to that bad advice, just a couple things in the news. I would call it a slow news day, just short of the people who things are happening to that aren't being reported nationally. The national media, the right-wing media, they're very selective about what they put out there. We know lots of things happen that we don't get an opportunity to discuss, at least on the national scene. On days like this, we'll find things that we know people are dealing with. And in this particular case, the internet privacy is divisive only because most people don't know much about it. They certainly aren't taking steps to do anything about it. But people like me had a bad attitude and were offering advice that, I've seen the error of my ways. We'll talk about that. In the news, Alan Weisselberg, the CEO of the Trump Organization, is pleading guilty today to 15 counts of tax evasion and different forms of fraud. Mostly the scheme was about paying directly for services like their kids' schools and other personal benefits and not reporting those things as income. Weisselberg received about $2 million of benefits that were found through the investigation, and he's been charged for. He is going to testify not specifically against Trump, but in addition to him being indicted and the trial coming up for him, he's settling out of that. He's pleading guilty, but the Trump Organization itself is on trial. That happens later in the fall, and he will be testifying in that trial. One of the conditions to keep his jail term to 5 months, which is what it's currently proposed to be, is that he be truthful in that trial. So again, we're going to learn more about the Trump Organization. I'm sure as divisive things arise, what we'll start to hear is that this too is an attack and a witch hunt and all of the excuses that are often laid out. But what I am not as confident in is people will have any questions about the Trump Organization or Donald Trump's integrity in business, despite the things we already know. Again, I think this is one of those things that will be put aside by people who support him. As usual, I'd love to have those supporters here to explain the benefits that outweigh the things that we have questions about. Now, I don't have all those answers. I'm curious about those answers. I don't question the integrity of the people who have their own feelings and thoughts. I'm just trying to get a better understanding of them. We just know that this probably for many supporters won't make any difference. And for those people who don't like them, they'll just be pointing out and saying, hey, look, there's more wrongdoing. How much can one human being get away with in one lifetime? But we, I think, have seen the answers to that enough times. Trump's also in the news for the releasing of the affidavit. The judge who issued the search warrant is going to decide today, and although he's going to hear the case today, I don't know if he'll decide whether or not the affidavit should be released, which will outline why they went, what information they had, who they received that information from. The Department of Justice does not want that to happen. They want to be able to continue the investigation without releasing the names of witnesses, and certainly don't want to put out the classified information they were searching for and or found. So it's highly contested. What I definitely am noticing is that the people on the right are calling for it as if the Department of Justice has to validate or verify for politicians what's happening. I certainly know it's a politically charged issue. If you raid the home of a former U.S. president, it's going to make the national news, and it's going to bring out politicians' best and worst. The worst case, they think that the DOJ needs to, in the middle of an investigation, lay out their cards, which my only thought on that, and obviously people on the left are trying to crucify and speculate. My only thought is don't succumb to political pressure. Politics is not the way we want our justice system to work. If there's a viable investigation, I hope they protect what needs to be protected, look into what needs to be looked into, but they don't succumb to the political pressure, to the talking heads and the politicians demanding what needs to happen. I listened to Lindsey Graham say that they need to do this, this, and this. And you want access to those people to say why. If there were an investigation on you, would you want all of that information released before they determine if a crime has been committed? What typically happens when they investigate, they don't release information until there is an indictment and they're going to use it for a trial. And if there isn't going to be an indictment or no criminal charges, they often don't release it at all for the person's privacy. Now, Trump has said he would like it released. That doesn't void the normal process that people go through in an investigation. I have to say this, if we are ever going to work out the divide, a little patience, a little restraint would be great as people who are charged with doing their job do it. And when we find or see or have evidence that they're not doing their job correctly, appropriately, then the investigation needs to turn to those people. What we find nowadays more often than not is we want to investigate the people investigating just because they're investigating. By the mere fact that someone is looking into someone, they are, before we know anything, the ones who are actually wrong. The investigators are wrong. I don't know what we would get if we questioned everything before anything actually happened. I want our justice system to work. We know there are flaws. We know there are reasons to protest and demand change. But it's often, odd to demand all of those things before we know anything. Can you imagine every single alleged suspect in the street accusing the officers, the investigators of wrongdoing, and expecting to walk away from it without that investigation occurring? Again, when wrongdoing is done, I expect anybody to be held accountable. But if we literally question every system that we have to the point that they're no longer valid by virtue of what the investigated person thinks, we're going to have a problem. And I certainly know the people now who are complaining that the investigators are the problem weren't screaming that when Black lives were fighting to not be abused. It's amazing. And I'm not saying it's racial, but it's amazing what people's priorities are and what matters to people and how little things matter until they think it's happening to someone they like or to themselves. It reeks of our priorities and standards being moving targets that are completely self-serving, have nothing to do with justice, have nothing to do with Americans. They have to do with, American me's, me. And I often talk about the me the people culture versus the we the people culture I think we're currently living in. So we may hear something about that. Yesterday, we briefly talked about the CDC and its leader recognizing, and they actually put out for essentially a third-party audit, and they did it quickly with the new leader because they knew there were problems, and the American people knew there were problems. And I don't think that this set of problems was purely a left or right thing, but there certainly was a divide between the information that the government was putting out that could be confusing and what the consumers were receiving and what the expectations were and who was setting them and what school system should follow and what companies should follow. It was all chaos. Well, there was an interview finally on this topic from the director of the CDC, and I wanted you to hear it so that you could hear what I think is supposed to happen, which is government accountability. We'd like it to happen much sooner. We'd like our voices to be heard. I don't know how you delineate the fact that our voices are sometimes split and they're politically motivated or self-motivated, but anytime there's a consensus, I think there ought to be a faster response. And I would say this to all of the politicians who spend a lot of time tweeting nonsense back and forth. Where were you and what was proposed so that we could solve some of the CDC issues sooner? I know it's run by the administration, but leaders are supposed to lead. And you don't have to be directly responsible for a particular issue to have a strong voice, opinion, and propose solutions to get things done. Here's that interview from the CDC director.
A startling admission from the head of the CDC that the agency has made serious mistakes during this COVID pandemic, which has killed more than 1 million Americans. The U.S. has by far the highest COVID death toll in the world. Dr. Rochelle Walensky is now calling for fundamental change to restore the public's trust as now monkeypox spreads and COVID numbers remain high in some places in the country. She spoke to our Dr. John LaPook in an exclusive TV interview last night.
Was the agency up to the task of handling this pandemic?
I think our public health infrastructure in the country was not up to the task of handling this pandemic.
Dr. Rochelle Walensky is vowing to revamp the CDC after its response to COVID-19.
We made some pretty public mistakes, and we need to own them.
This admission came after the CDC received the findings of an external review she ordered of the agency. The CDC says the review found the agency's COVID guidance was confusing and overwhelming. Why did you go ahead and commission this external review?
You know, I think it's really important to understand the great work of this agency, but also to admit to areas where we needed to improve. We owe that to the American people.
The CDC says its new objectives are to share scientific findings and data faster, translate the science into practical, easy-to-understand policy, and develop what Dr. Walensky called special forces to fight future pandemics.
We do now have an agency that has intense scientific expertise at almost every area of public health, which is a real gift. And what we really need to do is raise those folks outside of their silos.
Do you think they're up to the task of now changing their whole culture and thinking of themselves more like special forces that can be deployed wherever they're needed?
I have no doubt that they're up to the task.
Many say it can't come soon enough as monkeypox cases spike in the U.S. Last week, the FDA authorized a plan to stretch out the nation's limited supply of monkeypox vaccines by offering a way of administering shots at 1/5 the dose while eliciting a similar immune response. Do you think the criticism that the CDC has been moving too slowly in dealing with the monkeypox outbreak, those criticisms are valid?
We at CDC still have not seen all the immunization data that we need to be able to see in order to mobilize vaccinations across this country. Part of those challenges are similar to some of the challenges that we had with COVID-19, that we don't have full line of sight on all the data that we need in order to make real-time decisions.
Dr. Walensky says it remains a global fight to get monkeypox under control.
We always have the possibility of receding if we don't have it contained around the world. Back to the old statement, no one is safe until everyone is safe.
For CBS Mornings, I'm Dr. John LaPook.
All right, you hear some accountability, and all you could ever hope for in government is that we get more of it. All you could ever hope for is that there are watchful eyes and transparency, and that the obvious can occur, which, it sounds silly that you have to say that out loud, but Sometimes you have to say it out loud. The obvious doesn't always occur. And sometimes the divide is what keeps it from happening, and people taking responsibility is what keeps it from happening. But I know the middle would like that. We'd all be better off if we recognized when there was a problem and we were willing to address it. All too often, I don't think that happens. But I appreciate the fact that it appears that someone is taking responsibility here, and we can expect the expertise that we know they do have to be carried out. Now, I have seen quite a few memes on Twitter, on Facebook, and just about everywhere saying that conspiracy theorists should be apologized to. I won't be apologizing to any conspiracy theorist. What the CDC didn't say was that it was a conspiracy to do a bad job. It was a lack of leadership, a lack of streamlined messaging, and certainly a lack of understanding of what the consumer or the public was enduring, and the different messages. Conspiracy, I'm not willing to go there. I don't believe that. If we're only a nation of two parties, I think there are people from both parties involved in most of the things that have to happen, and that people, let's say from the right, would represent people from the right, and the left would represent people from the left after they do their job, after they do their day-to-day job. And certainly there'll be human nature and people will do things wrong. But the grand conspiracies I don't believe in. The evolution and the changes in information and what they put out there, they did a bad job and they're going to own it. But I don't think it invalidated each and every piece of it. I think it reflected what they knew and the lack of leadership to make sure everything they knew, and the best way to get that out and really finding out how it impacts the consumers or something that they considered. Hopefully they do a better job, and government accountability, whenever possible, is real. Now, internet privacy. Is it a divisive issue? Sure. Certainly for the companies who are collecting the data and want to monetize it, they'd like to continue down that path, and many of them will remind you the bad advice that I used to give people. Most commonly, people would talk about social media. They would talk about Facebook. You see every once in a while the thread of, by midnight tonight, you have to say this on your post for Facebook not to do this. And I used to say to those people, hey, listen, if you don't like what Facebook's going to do with Facebook, get off of it. If you don't like how Twitter is handling something, don't use Twitter. If you want a better version of something you like, create your own. Now, I won't admit to pure ignorance, but there was a lot of things I didn't know, and my opinion on the issue didn't reflect the reality for a lot of people. I am guilty of some of the things I talk about. Sometimes things don't seem real until they happen to you. It hasn't happened to me, but it could. And when it does, had I not considered any of the realities around internet privacy, I might fall victim and in line with a lot of things that are happening to a lot of people. But the advice I used to use, don't use it if you don't like it, I think can be tempered with, you still have human rights. You still have a right to privacy. There is a balancing act. In almost all cases, you have volunteered to put information out there that if someone else had would be bad and you wouldn't want them to. But as our systems and technology evolve, sometimes the only way to get things done is through use of technology. I think of my personal health situation and the interactions that I have with doctors and the access to ordering prescriptions and having them delivered, or communicating with my doctor the basic need to refill them, or symptoms, or very personal things that I guess, when you think about it, you're using the internet and you're using technology on a regular basis, and not everything is like Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever social media you might use, in that you are volunteering to put your information up there to the public. Sometimes we're interacting using the internet and we have no intention whatsoever of that information getting out there. I found a pretty good resource. It's called Clario. They talk about what online privacy is and why it's important. And I can tell you, online privacy, also known as internet privacy or digital privacy, refers to how much personal, financial, or browsing data remains private when you're online. It has become a growing worry, and the browsing history and personal data is now at more or is at a higher risk. And again, you don't necessarily think about all of the things that you do on the internet. I check my banking statements. I transfer money. There's just so many things that we just now do here. And I still know people who say, nope, I still have a checkbook, although I can't remember writing a check and I don't know how long. And there are people who don't use debit cards because they don't trust the security. They wouldn't want their account to be drained. They wouldn't have to wouldn't want to go and have to explain it to anybody that it wasn't them, and maybe not have access to their money. I've heard all of the reasons, many of them from older folks who haven't joined in the technology wave, and some of them wisely as you look at some of these issues. But for the average person or even the young people who keep up with technology and they go along with the next trend, Venmo, my kids don't even call me and ask me for money anymore. They send a Venmo request. And that's good. I don't really want to talk about it. They're probably going to get the money. I don't want to talk about the details anymore. It's overwhelming. Nonetheless, most of us are using a significant level of internet and technology, and most of us underestimate the importance of online privacy. And we're not aware of how much information we're actually putting out there, and what some of the things that can happen as a result of that. Now, do you really want your medical records or bank statements out there? I don't care, even maybe a shopping cart item. Maybe you're buying things that you find to be personal and private, and they're none of anyone's business. But we forget that the services we use to get access to that information, they can and will retain your information. So some of the favorite places you go, the people you communicate, the messages that you actually communicate with people, those are things that are available. Now, shockingly, 81% of Americans believe they have zero control over their data. I think they think because they're volunteering to use these mediums to get the information out there, they have no control. I can tell you steps are being taken. People are trying to step up and change that. I've certainly heard not everybody, a lot of people have heard about the EU, European Union, and their GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation that they passed in 2016 and implemented in 2018. It was intended to protect every EU citizen's privacy and data. California has an equivalent. It's called the CCPA. It gives consumers 4 basic rights to control their personal information on the internet. Those 4 basic rights are pretty simple. The right to know what personal information a business collects about them and how it's used and shared. It gives you the right to delete personal information that they have shared. It gives you the right to opt out of the sale of your personal information, and the right to non-discrimination for exercising any of your CCPA rights. Now, I have some questions about the right to sale of your personal information. That to me depends on where you are. If I'm going to my bank and I'm putting out personal information about my finances, if I'm talking to my doctor, quite frankly, if I'm shopping and I'm buying things that I don't want you to know that I bought, or I'm buying something for somebody else and it's none of your business that I bought it for them, nor the shipping address where it went. Very basic things that people are doing every single day online. But a place like Facebook, who makes money off that information, I feel like that could be different, where you are volunteering, you use their services for absolutely free, and in order for them to monetize it, they need to be able to generate revenue, which we all know they do in the form of advertising. So I'm curious how some of these rules apply as a blanket statement. I don't know what would happen if every single person said you cannot sell our information. I guess as a business model, a company like Facebook would have to respond and charge you to get access to the tools that you decide you regularly want to use. Because again, we volunteer to go put ourselves on social media. So I had a question about the right to opt out of the sale of your personal information. I get it. I just think that there may be some places where they should have to make very clear to you, if you come here, the way we make money is selling your information. Maybe these regulations will trump that theory and they'll have to charge for it. But then it begs the question, would you pay to use Facebook if you knew that they would not use any of the information that you put out there for anything other than what you intended for and the people you'd like to share it with? Now, that doesn't eliminate the fact that your browser may have information that you're transacting through that social media company. So there are still layers and layers that apply to your internet privacy and the potential risk that you're at. It's just the way it works. Other things, search engines, they can keep your search history. Cookies, although they're minor, they track the places you go. They make it easy for you to auto fill in fields, but they know things about you. And you're noticing now when you go to a lot of websites, they are all asking you if you'd like cookies to be applicable. And some just don't let you have access to their information if you don't. It's a decision you get to make about how you use your information. IP addresses, where are you? Who are you? That information can be gathered, whether it be by your service provider, the company that the browser that you use. That information is out there. And then your click-through history. Do you want everyone to know every single website you went to? These things are real. We already know social media harvests your information. We know why. It's related to advertising. But sometimes we forget about mobile apps. I've noticed this, and sometimes you question it. Sometimes you question it and you just keep going because you think you trust the app and it's no big deal. But they always ask you, well, not always. I feel like I'm always asked, am I okay with giving permission for the app to use my contacts, my pictures, just a list of things? And relevant to the thing that I'm trying to do on the app, your initial thought is, well, yeah, I need them to use the pictures. I'm going to send one or I'm going to post one. But you forget they're going to have access to the pictures that you're not sending and posting too. They have access to all of your pictures, all of your contacts. Can they sell that? Can they use that? Can they reach out to those contacts? Can they reach out to those contacts and give the impression that you gave them the contact information, adding credibility to why they're reaching out to the people in your contact list that you gave them permission to get access to when you were just thinking, no, I want my contact list on this app, so when I want to communicate with people, I have direct access to them. The broadness of the questions, the speed in which we try to download apps, install them, and use them leaves huge, huge gaps that I think people need to take into account. And obviously, with all of the security issues, the privacy issues, identity theft is real. There are people who've been robbed of everything. People who have to try to put their lives back together as a result of the theft of their identity. These things are all related to internet privacy. There are the phishing scams where someone puts up a link and you think it's Google, but it's not. And you have to pay attention to any link you click on. And I tell family and friends, I tell my kids, if you don't know that site specifically, don't click on the link. You could be giving access to your computer via malware. You could allow farming or a virus to get into your system. But even through malware, someone getting into your system and having access to everything. It's one thing to have access to the things that you readily put out there. Can you imagine if people had access to everything in your computer as it sits? Or being able to put viruses or things on your computer that allow them to see every transaction you make. They could watch you log into your bank account. They could see you put in your credit card information, your social security information. These things are all possible. And one of the most common ways are links. You click on the link, you add your username and password, not realizing where you went, although it looks identical to the sites that you would go to. You're literally giving information to a fake site, but your real information for the real site that they can immediately go use and get access to your information. These are things that you have to be aware of. Now, I'm not going through this without considering the reality. People discard computers and phones. Oftentimes, they don't wipe them out. Sometimes they just recycle them. Sometimes they give them away. Sometimes they're stored until they just get rid of the things in storage. Remember to wipe out data that you don't want people to have access to. There are companies and services that do it, and I know you have to trust them, but it's just the reality. And the point of this, again, I used to give the controversial or divisive advice, the divisive advice. If you don't want people to have your stuff, don't put anything out there. But as we evolve, as we move forward and use technology for more things, it's just not something that's possible. So there will be a divide between the companies and the people and the personal data. But right now, the people, I think, are just so used to giving out information. They are pleased with the convenience of the tools that we use that we just don't even consider internet privacy. And my point is, we have to. Here are a couple tips to protect your privacy. Probably one of the most important things. Secure your devices and use antivirus software. Now, we all hate the pop-ups. Oh, goodness, I hate the pop-ups. I remember the McAfee and the Norton antivirus software, and it didn't matter what you did. It was going to pop up. It was going to pop up. It was going to pop up. I use a different version, a great company, a local company here in San Diego. But listen, you need things to protect yourselves. You need people who understand what hackers are doing, are aware of what's happening in other places. They understand what's migrating to your area. You need people on top of that, helping you stay protected from it. Hackers, hijackers, same thing. They do all sorts of things, various schemes to steal your data. Many aren't obvious at first sight, but you need anti-tracking tools to prevent websites from collecting your data. You need a VPN is a great way to hide your IP address and online activity. Anti-spyware helps stop hackers from spying on you. These tools are readily available and they're affordable. Things that you absolutely should consider doing. There's another little thing. It's called DNT. It stands for Do Not Track. You can change the DNT settings in your browser. When you enable your browsing, and you can use Firefox, Chrome, Safari, You tell websites and third parties that you don't want to be tracked. There are settings for you to do that. This one's called Do Not Track, or your DNT. Go to your browser and find it. Little things that you could be doing. There are people who use cookie blocking browser extensions to not allow them to place cookies on your computer that help, although they can be helpful in filling out forms and recognizing you're back to a site and keeping you logged in. They also track information that you're doing. You can opt out of app tracking. And this goes back to that personal information you give your phone or your app, and allow them almost complete access to your microphone, which means they can record conversations, access to your camera, which means they could see you in your bedroom, the bathroom, wherever your phone is. We take the message and we only apply it to how we think we're going to use the app, and we forget the broad nature of access that we give them. Sometimes it does say only give access when you're using the app. That's typically the setting that I use, but oftentimes people allow that and they don't turn the app off. The app is just in the background. So these companies still have access to your information. This one, people just don't do it. I don't do it. That's why the bold writing, the big clear disclaimers are much better, but it's just the reality. Review privacy policies carefully. When's the last time you read a privacy policy before you hit agree? Be honest with yourself. When is the last time? If you read one, you're always going to find information and you're just going to say, what? What am I giving them access to? It's there all the time. Browse in the incognito mode. A lot of parents don't know this mode exists, which is how your kids get away with looking at things they shouldn't be looking at. Most of your browsers have an incognito mode or a hidden mode where it doesn't track where you go, your browsing history, and sometimes it does, so don't assume everything. But the incognito mode or private browsing allows you to keep your online history from being stored and remembered. Again, kids do it all the time. You parents, older folks, you might want to be aware that this feature exists, but you might also want to use it for your own internet privacy. Use different search engines. Search engines gather a ton of information. Google needs to know what you're looking for so it can put ads behind what you're looking for that are relevant and useful for you. So of course they pay attention to what you look for, where you went, what you clicked on when you got there. There are ways for them to gather all of that information. Be wary of what you're doing. Changing your search browser. There's one out there, DuckDuckGo. Don't get me wrong. I'm a Google fan. I use Google products. I'm not going anywhere. But there are alternatives, and some of them allow you to protect your privacy a little bit better. And I guess most importantly, I know this, be wary of what you click on online. If you don't know what it is, don't do it. If you don't know what it is, let me say it again, don't do it. So many people do it, and they're just not sure where they're going. They're not sure what they're clicking on. They're willing to just be risky and don't. I literally don't. I wouldn't do it. Be wary of links that don't make sense. They aren't obvious. Weird extensions or a piece of the name. You might see fraud.com. Well, the real domain name is fraud.com. They just did a subdomain of Google in the front, and it might get you to think it was Google. You have to pay attention. You really have to pay attention. You really, really, really have to pay attention. Hopefully you take those tips. Hopefully you remember that not all information that you put online is voluntary information that you want available to the public. Sometimes you're putting up private information, taking advantage of technology for medical reasons, banking reasons, purchasing reasons, research reasons. We have to keep in mind the reality behind using the internet. I tell this to kids. People know I'm a coach. College kids put ridiculous things on. I've seen kids be kicked off teams. I've seen kids not be recruited because of their online profiles. Not only are you putting up things you wouldn't want people to have access to, you're putting up things that people will judge you by. I heard a story earlier this morning, women who keep track of their periods and their reproductive cycles. People are getting access to that information to potentially sell them products. It's ridiculous. Be careful of the apps that you use and what information you let them collect and sell. That is the equivalent in some cases of your medical information, and the privacy that you would expect for it may not exist in an app, and you may be giving that right or waiving that right through the permissions that you give them. We know they're going to resell information. You need to be wary. There were questions about red flag laws and internet privacy. The Uvalde shooter posted online before he did what he did at this school. Law enforcement looking at it. What information do the companies who store your data have to give in an investigation? There's so many issues surrounding it. The divide is simple. There are people who have the information and are profiting from it. And then there's the rest of us who don't really know much about internet privacy. Hopefully the tips I gave will help. Hopefully you're more mindful of it. And the divide will close when we're a little more weary of our personal information online, and we demand more from those businesses, and in some cases governments, to help us protect ourselves. The divide isn't always political. The divide isn't always an argument you have in the street. Sometimes the divide is a lack of knowledge and people being taken advantage of. That's the one we have here. You're listening to the Divided States of America show. I'm appreciative for you being here. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to post them in the chats, put them on the comment threads. You can reach me at host@thedsa.com. We are here weekdays at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, YouTube Live, Facebook Live, and Twitter. I look forward to each and every opportunity I have to speak to you and to help bridge the gap, bridge the divide. We do take on the most divisive issues in our divided nation. Internet privacy is actually one of them. Keep that in mind. Protect yourself. Be safe. Go find some joy and come back and report some joy stories. I'm your host, Marlon Gardenera. Once again, grateful that each of you took the time to be here with me. Thanks again.
Thanks for watching the Divided States of America show. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the channel and share this video with your family and friends.